What's up, guys? This is Chris Raybon, the senior DFS editor from 4for4.com, and I am here with one of the best fantasy football and DFS analysts in the industry, Mr. Adam Levitan from DraftKings Playbook and Fantasy Labs. What's going on, Adam?
Hey, yeah, this is my first Slurve chat experience. I'm excited to do it with you, Chris. I'm excited to see what the people want to talk about because I'm typically talking to myself a lot and kind of in this bubble of people that live for fantasy sports. So I'm excited to see what people want to talk about.
Definitely, definitely. Before we jump into things, I just want to remind everybody in the chat that me and Adam will actually be here every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time all season long. So starting this week, every week from now, throughout the end of the season, we'll be here answering your questions, whatever questions you have about the NFL, fantasy football, DFS, and guys can also check out other expert chats on Slurve. Evan Silva from Roto World and Davis Maddock have a show together. Slurve has shows for all fantasy sports, so check it out, guys. But let's hop right in. Adam, I know we were talking off air, so let's just start off with Jeremy Langford.
Mhm.
Uh, I know he ran with the starters in the second preseason game, 9 touches, 63 yards, and a touchdown. What are your thoughts on Langford and his ability to hold on to the Bears' lead back job throughout the season?
Yeah, so I think that's the question. Can he hang on to it? But at least from the outset, I mean, I think his average draft position is just dreadfully low. If it weren't for Mike Clay of ESPN, who I love Mike Clay, like during the season, I really only try to read like a very select few people, not because I don't respect all these kinds of people, just because it like muddles my head. But one of the people that I do really like to read every week is Mike Clay, and so I have all the respect in the world for him. But without him, just tearing Jeremy Langford to shreds in his articles and on Twitter. I suspect that Jeremy Langford's ADP would be in the fourth round, maybe late fourth, early fifth, but because of that article and then all the groupthink that comes along with it after, I think he's been available in the seventh round at times, which is just egregious for a guy who played all 10 first team snaps in week one and then played, I believe it was 33 out of 36 first team snaps in week two of the preseason. So he's a three down back. He's a goal line back. Last year when Matt Forte missed time, 3 games, Langford averaged 21.3 touches per game. So yeah, I mean they're at Houston week one. It's not the best possible matchup. Langford's 4,700 on DK though. That I think that's too cheap, and I'll certainly have some exposure to him.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point about Langford in week one because you mentioned the 21.3 touches per game in the 3 games Forte missed. All three of those games, Langford was an underdog, and 2 of those games, he was a road underdog.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of people aren't going to be on Langford in week one, but just think if it was week eight and you had a running back for 4,700 that you knew had 20 touch upside and reception upside, would you play him? The answer is probably yes. So,
Mm-hmm.
but again, I think because of the group think, because of the ADP being in the seventh round, a lot of people not feeling comfortable with him. I think he'll go way under owned. So interesting GPP play to keep in mind. We have a question from Andy. How do we feel about Oakland in week one? And I'll go first. I think Oakland, I actually like the running game a lot for Oakland in week one. I think that the Saints front seven has just been decimated. They lost Kikaha, they lost Sheldon Rankins, and their front seven was already one of the poorest in the league. Their run defense was already one of the poorest in the league. So I think that Oakland, who has a top two, top three offensive line according to Pro Football Focus, should be able to move the ball consistently on the ground. Looks like it's going to be Latavius Murray. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, so I expect Latavius Murray to be the most owned player in Week One. Maybe on both. Well, probably not on FanDuel, but almost certainly on DraftKings. I think he'll probably be the most owned player. He's 5,700. Everybody wants to pick on the Saints, and with good reason. And Latavius has been the exclusive first team back, getting every single snap. Again, third down plus goal line. I do think that the Raiders probably have the best offensive line in the league on paper, if not the second best behind Dallas, and obviously that makes a big difference. Expect that game to be high scoring. It's just I'm probably almost certainly have Latavius in my cash game lineup. I think he's an interesting fade just from an ownership perspective in week one, I mean, he could be approaching 40, 45%, and we know the fail rate for running backs or really any player in a week-to-week basis in the NFL is way too high for someone to be 45 or more owned.
Definitely, and that's just a great point about the offensive line. It makes so much of a difference, and it's the reason why even when you try to judge talent, and going back to Langford, maybe he isn't one of the most talented backs in the NFL, but you can't even judge a back strictly off his production and his yards per carry average, because so much of it has to do with the offensive line. So I think Langford is going to be interesting, especially if J.J. Watt misses that game. Murray, again, great cash game play, like you said, Adam. Probably a tournament fade. Let's talk about some other.
I want to yeah, I want to ask you about a guy
Okay.
because there's a wide range of opinions on this guy. I've seen Tyler Lockett go as early as the fifth round. I've seen him go as late as the eighth round. I've seen people predict just really breakout numbers for him. So tell me where you stand on Tyler Lockett.
Tyler Lockett for me is not going to be on a lot of my fantasy teams, and it has nothing to do with Tyler Lockett. It's the way I've been drafting. I usually go wide receiver heavy in the first through fifth round. So I'm usually coming out of the fifth round with 4 wide receivers, or sometimes even 5. And to me, Lockett is a 6th round pick at the earliest, and that's just because I think he does have some volume concerns, but they are mitigated by the fact that Russell Wilson is just playing out of his mind football. He could be getting better. He could be getting more efficient for all we know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm not concerned about Lockett's overall production. I wish he had a little more upside in terms of volume. I think he's a 6th round pick. I think he's going to build on last year's numbers, but I find it hard to take him before the 6th round. I find it hard to take him before guys like John Brown and Larry Fitzgerald and guys like that. But I think he's a great 6th round pick, a lot of upside, and he'll definitely have some big weeks in there. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, Tyler Lockett's an awesome player. Let's get that out there first. But a lot of times that's really not what we're talking about here. The concern for me is that Russell Wilson, who I absolutely love, agree with you, they're going to put more on his shoulders in the wake of Marshawn Lynch's retirement. I think Russ is going to have an awesome year, but to think that he's going to do what he did over the second half last year, in which he had a 27-1 TD to INT ratio, had like the most absurd YPA, insane completion percentage, all these like historical numbers, like not exaggerating, like really historical over the last 7 or 8 games of last year. And still in those games, Lockett only got like 7 targets. He had some 4-target games, even with Russell Wilson tearing the cover off. So the concern for me is that there's a lot of hype around Tyler Lockett. I would not take him in the 6th round. I would probably not take him until the 8th or 9th round. And because of that, I'm probably going to have 0 shares of Tyler Lockett. I do think he'll have some huge games. Like if you hit him, people are going to get down on him because he has some bad games. If you can hit him in DFS one week when he is low owned, I'm happy about that. But he's kind of like the guy for me, that guys who have a really like wide range of outcomes in a given week, I want to use them when they're low owned, not when they're high owned. So, yeah, I guess I'm lower on Tyler Lockett than most.
Definitely. And I guess I should clarify, when I said 6th round pick, that's actually, I was thinking of best ball, because that's really
Mm-hmm.
most of the type of leagues I'm playing in this year. I try not to play in too many straight up season long leagues, just because I play a ton of DFS, and it's hard to manage season long leagues on Sunday morning and set a bunch of lineups while you're also managing DFS. So I think Lockett is a better best ball play, because like you said, Adam, in straight up redraft where you have to choose whether to start him or not, it's going to be difficult to predict exactly when he is going to go off. And we got to remember, too, that Doug Baldwin over the second half of the season was on a 94 reception pace.
Mm-hmm.
So if Doug Baldwin's going to be a 90 catch receiver and they short paid him like one,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't leave a lot for other receivers. Lockett is a type of receiver that he runs more routes that would lead to more weekly volatility. He runs some deeper routes and things like that. So definitely understand there. And again, for the people that maybe aren't as familiar with some of our work, targets is just the number one thing that correlates to fantasy production. You need those targets, and a guy like Lockett, his targets are dangerously low. Again, somewhat mitigated by Russell Wilson. But moving on, let's see. We got a question. How about Osweiler, D
Hmm.
Hop, and Miller.
Hmm.
How do you feel about those guys, Adam?
Oh God, I don't even like this is I've already talked about it on my pod. Like this might be my number one stack of week one for GPP is going to be Brock and Nuke or well, first of all, do you know is it Nuke or Nuck? Do you have any idea?
I don't know.
I
I
think it's
see that
Nuke.
all. Okay, Nuke.
I
That
mean,
sounds.
I thought it was Nuke, and then people are tweeting at me saying it's Nuck. I'm pretty sure it's Nuke. But anyways, Brock Nuke or Brock Fuller, and by the way, Will Fuller played on 100% of the first team snaps in week one, running well ahead of Jalen Strong, obviously ahead of Braxton Miller. So I think of this Bears, what they've done with their front seven is impressive. I think they will be strong in the front seven. Their secondary is just a total dumpster fire. When I see situations like that where I think that a coach will go into a game and game plan a certain way, I think the game plan will be to throw the football. And we know that Bill O'Brien's going to play very fast. I think Brock is grossly underrated, both in week one and in season long. I mean, we saw Bill O'Brien turn Christian Hackenberg, turn Brian Hoyer into really good players or really good quarterbacks, and those guys have questionable ability overall. So I think he'll do well with Brock Osweiler. And again, I like Nuke in week one. Nobody on the Bears can stop him, and I think Will Fuller's going to have some chances on bombs. Lamar Miller overall, to me, I think is a major threat to be the number one running back in fantasy this year, but I'm not sure I'm going to be on him in week one just because I'll be on the Brock Nuke and Brock Fuller train.
Yeah, and I just saw something about Bears cornerback Kyle Fuller
Yeah.
possibly missing some time. So if he's not ready for week one, who is going to cover
Yeah.
Hopkins? Like,
And Fuller sucks anyway. Like he doesn't suck, but like I'm not like he's just like I feel like he's declining slash not that good. So yeah, I agree with you though. He's hurt too.
yeah, and it's gonna be one of those kind of I think funnel situations with that front seven. That
Hmm.
front seven is really good. Miller can catch passes,
Hmm.
so that might mitigate something. And I guess we can talk about some of the research I did about stacking. I found that after the wide receiver one, the best player on a team to stack with a quarterback and a receiver is the RB1. So certainly wouldn't rule a Brock Miller Hopkins stack out because the Bears defense, as good as their front seven might be, if their back end is that disastrous,
Hmm.
the Texans could just move the ball down the field, and Miller might still be able to get into the end zone a couple of times. So I wouldn't. I would
Yeah.
definitely go with that stack, Jeremy. Jason asks Eli Beckham or Wilson Baldwin or Lockett. Who will be more popular in Week One?
Yeah, I think Russell Wilson. I'm not sure people necessarily stack with Russ, right? Because A, they can tell themselves, well, he might run in a couple scores, and B, they tell themselves, well, I don't really love Baldwin, I don't really love Lockett, I don't really love Curse, so I think a lot of people go naked Russ. So I would expect to see more ownership on Eli Beckham just because people love to roster Odell, and they'll love to stack it with Eli. So yeah, I would say that Eli Beckham would be the more popular stack, but in terms of raw ownership, I would say Wilson, I think, would be more popular home game against Miami, who could be really, really bad defensively this year.
It's interesting you said like most people go naked Russell Wilson except Sierra, who just
Oh.
started going naked Rust. So something to keep in mind. But yeah, I agree. I think Wilson will have higher ownership. Eli Beckham, interesting stacker though. Something to keep in mind. Last year, the two games against Dallas, they actually defended Beckham probably better than any other team in the league, which I thought was really interesting. And it was just because Dallas was able to slow the game down and kind of limit Beckham's impact. So that's also something to keep in mind. But Vegas is pretty bullish on this game. I think the over/under is like 48-49.
Mhm.
So uh, good
Yeah.
situations in both cases.
I mean, on DraftKings, Odell is 9,300, which is like really expensive. Like last year, he started out at like 84 or 8,500. It's hard to build lineups when you're rostering Odell Beckham unless you're willing to go like Rashard Matthews or somebody in that like 4K range. So if you're definitely playing Latavius or you're definitely playing Ryan Matthews or you want to play, Russ Wilson or whatever, it's hard to fit Odell. And I kind of agree with you that I think. Um, Odell might be a little pricey considering the matchup in week one.
Definitely. Let's see. We got some Bridgewater and Diggs. What do you think about a Bridgewater Diggs stack against Tennessee?
I prefer Brock to Bridgewater. I mean, I think we've seen some maybe signs of Teddy increasing his ability to throw the ball down the field, but until I see him do it in a live setting in a regular season game instead of just kind of dinking and dunking and all this, I'm probably going to be completely off Teddy and Laquan Treadwell, who I thought would fit really well with Teddy's skill set, hasn't even broken the first team yet. I mean, Laquan keeps on running with the backups in all these preseason games and in practices, running behind Charles Johnson and Stephon Diggs. So, I mean, that'll be lightly owned, Bridgewater and Diggs. I just don't think that's something I'm going to be on, and we expect Tennessee to play real slow as well.
Right, and I think that's a game that could just be barren in terms of fantasy production outside of maybe the running backs, because you mentioned Tennessee trying to play slow, and then we know how Minnesota plays, uh, feeding the ball to Peterson. So both of those teams are run-first teams, and that could shorten the game and ultimately cap the upside for Bridgewater and Diggs, even though they will be lightly owned, and they do come at good prices. But yeah, again, I wouldn't be on them too much either. Uh, the DFS player you least want to pick up your head-to-heads is.
hmm Yeah, I'll start there. I mean, I know the answer to this because I obviously track all my stats and I have all my opponents in head-to-heads, and the player that beats me the most often is Empire Maker. I don't know if you guys know who that is or not, but he's not very public, but he just completely buries me. So I doubt he's watching this, but if he is, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to do battle. I'm not going to block him or anything. I'm ready to battle, but it's not fun.
That's fair. I think I'd have to go. I mean, I don't track my results as closely as far as every head-to-head. I kind of just post a bunch and go through them. But just somebody that comes to mind is my friend Bales. I don't think I'd
hmm
want to play him, just because we think so much alike, and I feel like we could end up like having the same lineup and just giving the rate to the site.
hmm
But and you study, whose lineup do you study in GPPs the most?
Yeah, I'm not big into GPPs that much. I tried playing some of the 100-man qualifiers to the live final last year, which are really, really tough. And, most people only put one or two entries into them, which is interesting. I always thought that Ganondorf had some interesting plays in there. I always thought Bales was, kind of doing the thing that I think is optimal for GPPs in general, but also for the qualifiers, which is, if we're not getting first, we're getting last type of deal, and really thinking about ownership in that way. So, yeah, I think anybody who is using ownership projections to their advantage instead of just blindly making GPP lineups because they like X guy is somebody that I would want to look at.
Definitely. And I'll just add that it's not always the specific players that you want to study. A lot of times I just like to study the top lineups regardless of who they're from, just to see, what's happening, what are people's thought processes that lead to these top lineups. Are there any trends, things like that. I think it's always a good idea in those large fields to just kind of go through the top 10, 20, 30 lineups and see what you can learn from that. Let's see. Jeremy says reading the playbook, listening to the DFS MVP pod. How big is your player pool at each position? I usually it depends on the week. There usually will be a bunch of players that I will be avoiding no matter what. So I usually start there. But my player pool is usually probably surprisingly larger than people think, because I think you have to have some core plays, but in a GPP you have to really understand variance and ownership, and that kind of opens the door to a lot of players. So I say at quarterback, there's usually a good maybe 10, 15 quarterbacks that I consider playing in a given week. Running back, it's usually a little less, because I think at running back I have the smallest player pool, because I really only want guys that I think have 20 touch upside, and that kind of cuts down a lot of players. Like I know, there'll be weeks when Theo Riddick might blow up or something like that, but I'm just not trying to predict those weeks. So I'm usually limiting my running back player pool to guys who I think have 20 touch upside, and then at wide receivers a little bigger player pool, but I am generally trying to pay up a lot at wide receiver. Usually at least two of my wide receiver slots are going to go to studs, and I try to just go with maybe the second tier of ownership for like the studs, maybe not the top owned stud, but this in the second tier of ownership. And tight ends is probably another smaller one just because need targets and some favorable Vegas odds, as I've learned recently. What about your player pool, Adam?
Yeah, so as somebody that mainly plays cash, I really try to keep it tight. Like I think that there's one to two by the time like Saturday comes, I think there's one to two quarterbacks that I'm really thinking about, and after I get my cash lineup set, which is largely based on high floor guys and consistency ratings and stuff like that, then when I make my tournament lineup and you know something I've been trying to work out is, hey, I'm going to make one cash lineup, I'm going to make one tournament lineup, and that turn like I'm not just going to fire off all these lineups. I'm going to make one tournament lineup based on ownership, based on leverage plays. And what I mean by leverage plays is, so an example would be Latavius Murray, who I already said I expect to be 45% owned in week one. So knowing that, an optimal tournament leverage play would be finding somebody else in his price range, which is 5,600, that we think will be low owned, so that we know nobody will be on. So like if Latavius has a bad game or breaks his leg or whatever, we just shoot to the top of the leaderboard if our guy can have a good game. So yeah, I really try to keep my player pools tight, and then tweak my cash lineup for GPP considerations as Sunday approaches.
Yeah, and that's a good point about playing, one cash lineup, because I also play one cash lineup, and I think some people hesitate to play just one cash lineup because they think it's risky. But I think if you play a lot of head-to-head games as your cash games as opposed to 50-50s, I think one cash game lineup makes a lot of sense because you can get your diversification by playing different opponents in head-to-head rather than trying to play suboptimal players in your lineup in your alternate cash lineups. You can stick to one cash lineup with the most what you think are the most optimal plays. But if you're playing a whole bunch of different diverse competition, your lineup will ultimately perform to whatever level it's supposed to, give or take. So I'm a big fan of playing one cash lineup and playing head-to-heads and mitigating risk that way.
Yeah, yeah. Look, man, like I want to bleed. You know what I mean? Like maybe I'm sick, but like if we're constantly hedging, like we're never gonna win a lot, and maybe we're never gonna lose a lot. But like if just constantly hovering around even and paying the rake is really not something that I'm interested in. So that's a big reason why I only play one cash lineup.
Definitely, like that's why we're here. Like we're not here to just break even or make like a tiny profit. Like if
Hmm.
you have one cash lineup and it goes and you're good at what you do, you're going to consistently win more. So I would definitely recommend trying to narrow it down to one cash lineup. Uh, Chris's 4 for 4 article shows strong opposing wide receiver one correlation. Favorite quarterback, wide receiver, and opposing wide receiver stack in week one. Drewby's going Brock plus Nuke plus Alshon. What do you think, Adam?
Oh, I'm on that for sure. I mean, it's expensive. Nuke and Alshon are both expensive, but yeah. Why don't you talk about it? Talk about that correlation for a minute. I'll look for another one that I like.
Cool. So I did an article on 4for4.com. It's actually two articles, one for FanDuel and one for DraftKings. They're called The Definitive Guide to Stacking on FanDuel and The Definitive Guide to Stacking, on DraftKings. And what I found was that there is a strong correlation between opposing passing games. So if you play on two quarterback sites, first of all, there's a really strong correlation between a quarterback and the opposing quarterback. And then as well, there is a strong correlation between the quarterback and the opposing wide receiver one and opposing wide receiver ones. So what that's saying is that when one team is putting up a lot of production through the air, a lot of times that is leading to the opposing team doing so. It's kind of the shootout effect, but it doesn't just happen in games with high over-unders. It's happening throughout all types of games. So that's something to look out for. And another stack to utilize that probably not enough people have been utilizing currently, and I'm sure people will catch on throughout the season and adjust. But especially early in the season, something I would really want to utilize, and uh, it's it's uh it's something where you can, if you are playing tournaments, you probably have a player pool anyway. So if you plan, for example, to play Alshon Jeffrey and Nuke anyway, because they're both in your player pool, it would be a good idea to pair them rather than to put them in separate lineups. And that's how I would really kind of go about it for you tournament players. You're going to have a player pool. Maybe you have 10 wide receivers. Anytime you're making multiple lineups, just try to pair up the wideouts from the same game as opposed to playing them in separate lineups.
Hmm. Yeah, so the way I think of it is like we're going to need our quarterback wide receiver stack to just completely go ham if we're going to win one of these big tournaments, right? And if that happens, like let's say we do Luck and T.Y. Hilton at home against the Lions in week 1, like if they go off for 2 touchdowns and 180 yards or something like that together, well, Detroit's likely going to be playing from behind, or they're likely going to be putting up a lot of points. So like I think Luck, Hilton, Tate, or Luck, Moncrief, Marvin, or something like that makes a lot of sense in week 1, and that might be kind of popular, but I think one that wouldn't be as popular would be something with Jameis and Mike Evans, and then one of Julio or Sanu. I think Sanu might be going overlooked. People are kind of afraid of him in a new environment, but we saw Roddy White as the number 2 receiver get a lot of targets. We even saw Harry Douglas, anytime Roddy White was hurt, put up some serious numbers. So I think something like Jameis, Mike Evans, Sanu will be extremely low-owned and have a chance to get up there in tournaments too.
Yeah, that's a good one. That Tampa Bay Atlanta game, probably not going to be a huge game, go a little overlooked. So that's a good stack there.
Why don't you give me your? I just mentioned Marvin. Why don't you give me your Marvin take?
So Marvin, I was a little skeptical at first because I think anytime a free agent wide receiver signs with a new team, you always have to be a little careful there because it takes time for a quarterback and a receiver to get on the same page, and especially coming to Detroit, Golden Tate already back-to-back high-volume seasons with Matthew Stafford, even with Calvin Johnson there. But from what I've seen in the preseason so far, Stafford and Jones appear to have good chemistry. Of course, these are just glorified practices, so you can't read too much into them. But I think I'm a little more comfortable now with taking Marvin Jones at his average draft position or maybe a few slots ahead of it, just based on what I've seen so far. I don't think there will be any trouble there. Anquan Boldin also looking good, not looking washed up at all. So I think the real beneficiary here might actually be Matthew Stafford in all of this, because I think, especially after news of Ebron's ankle injury came out, I think we were all a little hesitant to continue to roll with Stafford, but he looks good. Boldin has looked good. Marvin Jones has looked good. We know what Tate is. They still have Theo Riddick, who can catch 70, 80 balls if they need him to, and it just all depending on Ebron's health, that would just be a bonus at this point. But we know Detroit is going to struggle to run the ball. Their offensive line just isn't there yet. So I like Stafford. I like Jones. I think Jones does have a chance to be used in that Calvin Johnson kind of way, and could get similar volume to Calvin, because remember, Tate was still getting that volume with Calvin Johnson there. So I like Marvin Jones, the upside play.
Yeah, agree with you that I like targeting Detroit pass game. I don't expect them to be able to run the ball very well. I'm a huge Golden Tate fan. I actually think Golden Tate is a really, really good football player. I was kind of I thought it wasn't optimal that Detroit signed Anquan Boldin, just because what Golden Tate does so well is yards after the catch and kind of take these quick hitters and been doing a lot with them. So I thought Golden Tate was going to be an awesome play in week 1, because we knew Vontae Davis does not go into the slot, and Golden Tate was going to do a lot of his work in the slot. Now that Anquan Boldin is there, it's like, well, Golden Tate might go outside, and I don't know what Indy's going to do with Vontae Davis. I mean, do they shadow Golden Tate? Do they leave him on one side and let Marvin or Golden Tate come to him? So now there's probably a little bit too many questions for me to use Golden Tate at 7,300 in cash. But in general, I like Golden Tate more than Marvin Jones. But Marvin Jones looked awesome last night, and I don't put a lot of stock in that. But he does seem like a guy who is gifted enough and in the right role to really step right in as a free agent.
Definitely, and 4,600 in week one,
Yeah.
much better price than Tate. And I agree. If the question, I think I could see them just leaving Vontae on one side because I think he actually probably matches up better with Marvin Jones,
Hmm.
just from a physical standpoint. I think Golden Tate, because he can move laterally very quickly, it's probably not the best matchup for Vontae Davis, but
Yeah. No, Marvin Jones 4,600 is I mean way too cheap.
definitely. Let's see, Fleener in week one on
Yeah.
DK. What is he?
On
What is his
FanDuel,
price?
yeah.
Oh, on
Yeah,
FanDuel, sorry.
no, on FanDuel, yeah, I agree with Jeremy. I mean, that was like the first thing that I saw. It's going to be really hard for me not to play Fleener in week one on FanDuel. On DraftKings, there's a bigger decision because Fleener is the, I believe, second most expensive tight end on the main slate. And then we have guys like Dwayne Allen at 3,200 and Julius Thomas at 3,800. So, there's big difference in pricing on the sites. Like DraftKings always, much like they do with Stenners in basketball, they depress the price of tight ends in football. And I've talked, with Peter about this a lot, how he often plays tight end in the flex on DraftKings, which is kind of counterintuitive, but it's just to get him more salary at other positions because all the tight ends are so underpriced.
Definitely, and I know you guys at Fantasy Labs do a bargain rating where you
Yeah.
compare FanDuel salary to DraftKings salary, and you brought up Dwayne Allen on FanDuel. Dwayne Allen is actually priced more than Kobe Fleener. He's at 5,500 and Fleener's at 5,400,
Yeah.
whereas on DraftKings now Dwayne Allen's at 3,200 and Fleener's at 49. So
Right.
major value for Dwayne Allen on DraftKings. The Lions struggled against tight ends last season as well. We don't know if that will carry over or not,
Yeah.
but
No,
uh,
I'm gonna play Dwayne Allen in week one, and he's gonna have like 3 catches for 30 yards, and I'm gonna jump out the window. But I still think it's the right play.
oh, definitely. And let's see what else we got here. Adam, when you talked about pivoting off, for example, Latavius in week one due to his high ownership projection and taking another running back in that same salary range, are you doing that with your cash lineup as well as your GPP lineup, or are you not worried about ownership percentage in cash?
Yeah, no, I should have explained that better. I meant that I make my cash team, and then and I don't worry about ownership whatsoever. And then when I go to make my one best GPP team, that's when I start thinking about ownership and pivots and stuff like that. So yeah, I'll probably be playing Latavius in cash, and if I'm not, it won't be because I'm scared of ownership or anything. I don't worry about that. I mean, if he's 40% owned in cash, there's still 6 out of 10 people that are just like, if it's a really great play, that are just screwed.
Definitely. Adam, what do you think of Frank Gore's week one ownership? Where do you think that's going to be compared to Latavius? Gore is a home favorite against the Lions. It's a
Yeah.
pretty decent spread, about 4 or 5 points last time I checked. What do you think his ownership is going to end up?
Yeah, I mean, look, people don't roster old guys, and maybe like I'm probably to blame there too. I mean, I never play Frank Gore. I don't play old guys very often in general, but we can't deny the durability and the touchdown upside that Gore has. I expect the Colts to be in the red zone a ton, and Gore is unquestionably their goal line back. So yeah, I think that's an interesting pivot. I do not expect him to be high owned whatsoever, Frank Gore. I think he could be under 7 or 8%.
Would you go in a tournament? Would you go Gore or Matthews?
Yeah, I think I would go Matthews, but he could. Let's see what people are talking about ahead of week one. Matthews could end up being really popular too. I mean, Philly is a 6 point favorite at home against Cleveland. I do think Darren Sproles will be more involved than people think on the Eagles, but Frank Gore is probably not going to touch the ball 25 times either. So yeah, it's certainly close. That could be an ownership decision.
Definitely. JTK asks, how many GPP lineups do we construct generally? That really depends. I'll go first. I tend to be I like to play a lot of GPPs in a given week, so I might sometimes play upwards of 50 lineups in a given week. Now, these all won't be 100-hour buy-ins necessarily. I might take my best 10 GPP lineups and play those in higher buy-in tournaments, but I'll have some more kind of secondary GPP lineups that I don't feel quite as good about, but that I still want to play, and I might, throw maybe a whole bunch of those in maybe the $5 or the $10 or $20 tournament or something like that. So I think it really just comes down to how many do you want to play in a given week, how many players do you like, how many combinations do you like, how much of your bankroll do you have to spend. And I think if you want to play a lot of GPP lineups, that's certainly fine. You can just enter them in the cheaper tournaments. But if you're more of a guy that likes to construct, a few really good GPP lineups, then that's perfectly fine too. And then you just play them in tournaments with higher buy-ins. How many GPP lineups for you, Adam? I know you're mostly a cash game player.
Yeah, so I experimented last year with making a lot. Like, I guess the most I probably made was 50 or something like that. But I don't know. Like, I get overwhelmed with managing them all and being like, well, do I have enough of this guy? Do I have enough of that guy? Is this correlation right? It's just overwhelming for me to have a ton of them. So I'm really trying to focus in on having the optimal cash lineup and what I think is the ultimate tournament lineup, and then taking that tournament line and putting it in the higher buy-in tournaments with less people, just because, like, let's say somebody that I'd never be on, like, I don't even know who somebody like Leonte Carew or something absurd like that. Like, if he has 4 touchdowns in week 1, I mean, there's 0% chance I have any of them, but I guarantee you in that Millie Maker, somebody's going to have Leonte Carew. So, like, if you play the higher ones, you won't have that, and it's more, I think, of a truer result against people that are also thinking, and you can try to outthink them some. So yeah, I'm trying to narrow mine down. There's tons of lineup generators and stuff like that, stacking tools and all that. If you just want to fire off 100 entries into the $1 and then start sweating and see if you can get a sweat, that's cool too. But yeah, I think for me, I like better trying to actually think it through.
So let me ask you this. Given that you're playing more of a quality over quantity approach in GPPs, are you more of a single entry tournament kind of guy, or do you still play in the ones with multi-entries?
Yeah, no, this is so crazy to me, this whole controversy over multi-entry. Like, people want to play in big buy-in tournaments, right? Like, that's the first thing they look at when they go to the DraftKings homepage. Like, oh, what's first place? How much is the prize pool? And then they're like, well, I only want to play single entry. Multi-entry is not fair. Well, you can't have both, right? Like, the single entry and the multi-entry, like, the multi-entry are going to have bigger prize pools. So I have no problem with the single entry. I think people make a big mistake putting their cash lineup into the single entry. I like to put my tournament lineup into the single entry. But yeah, I think that I'll still play the multi-entry ones. I mean, as people just want to fire off and fire off and fire off and light more money on fire, that's fine by me. I don't really see the problem.
Terrell Pryor. I knew it would not be too long before we got to Terrell Pryor in this conversation. Mm-hmm. Viable punt option in week 1 against the Eagles. What do you think?
Oh God, I'm laughing because I like one of the first. I don't know the first few times I played DFS, but like definitely in the first year I was playing, Terrell Pryor was a quarterback for the Raiders, and Absolutely. He broke off like a 70-yard run.
Yeah, I remember that. It was like an 89-yarder.
Yeah, and he was like 5K on FanDuel at that time, which was like the stone minimum, and I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Now I'm laughing because he looks like a legit wide receiver out there. I think his ownership will be bloated by what he did last night. Maybe not a lot, but maybe 5%, 4%. I mean, what is he? He's got to be minimum on DraftKings, right? I didn't even look.
Yeah.
He's stone minimum 3K. So, Corey Coleman right now is a little bit banged up, maybe a little bit out of shape. I don't know. Josh Gordon is suspended for the first 4 games. Terrell Pryor will start. I'm just like, I don't know. Like, how many points is Cleveland really going to score? I know they have some speed. I like some of their players. I don't know how many points they're going to score. I believe that game's total is down around 38, and Cleveland is only a 6-point dog. That leaves them with a really low team total. So I don't know. I'm probably off Pryor, but I hope he doesn't burn me because I really like the guy.
Yeah, I actually think this game has some potential. Week 1, while I think Vegas it's generally good to follow. I'm not too big on the Vegas lines in weeks like 1 and 2, just because I think just like us, they don't know exactly what's going to happen, and I think this game has some potential because I think Cleveland's defense has a lot of work to do, and I also think that the Eagles' defense, I think it will be better, but Terrell Pryor's been getting such separation. I mean, he got about 2 steps on Trufant, who is one
Mhm.
of the better cornerbacks in the league. And, again, this could just be preseason. Robert Griffin looked good. He looked faster. He actually had a good run, which we haven't seen in, like 3-4 years now. But I think there is actually some potential with this offense. I wouldn't be against even a stack of RG3 and Pryor, assuming Pryor continues to play like this and keeps the starting job, and RG3 is still alive in week 1. I mean, I'm fine with that stack. I don't think Philadelphia's cornerbacks are too
Right.
good, and I think if Pryor just gets one play where he gets separation and RG3 can hit him, Pryor comes close to paying off his cost.
Oh
So
yeah. I mean, look,
viable, yes. Viable, yes.
he's 3K. I mean, it's not going to take a
Yeah.
lot for him. And RG3 is 5,600. Like that's why I kind of think the stack might be popular. It's a good matchup. On DraftKings, there's that green like 30-second thing next to opponent rank for the Eagles defense. So yeah, I think it'll be a little bit popular.
And guys, don't look at those DraftKings things because like that. I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of people are going to look at those and I know you at Fantasy Labs and me over here at 4for4. We both are really big on schedule adjusted defensive
Mhm.
metrics, and the ones DraftKings are using are not schedule adjusted. Never mind that it's week 1 and these numbers could mean absolutely nothing
Right.
anyway because they're from last season. And I think the Eagles defense will be better. Number one, just because their pace will be a lot slower. Chip Kelly was running at such a high pace and his offense was not good last year. So the Eagles defense on the field for a ton of plays. But that being said, I think that does affect ownership percentages, so something to keep in mind. Which teams do we think have changed pace the most year over year? Eagles stand out as playing slower. Who do you think has slowed or speeded up the most? Any teams that come to mind?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not something I've thought about a lot. Just kind of thinking here off the cuff. I know Adam Gase down in Miami with the coaching change down there has encouraged Ryan Tannehill to do more no huddle, play faster. I don't know how effective that will be, but it certainly can't hurt Jarvis Landry if they're playing faster. I think San Diego is going to play fast with just putting more and more and more on Philip Rivers' shoulders. And we already hit on it a little bit. I think especially this year, like in important situations, like everything's on Russ. It's not going to be where it was before he turned around and handed the ball to Marshawn Lynch. This is not going to be like the Rawls C Mike show. I think that Seattle doing more with Russ, more no huddle, all that makes sense too.
Cool. And on the flip side, it's terms of teams that are going to slow the pace down. I think one we just talked about, the Eagles, because Chip Kelly is going away. Peterson coming from Kansas City, who notoriously plays at a pretty slow pace, even in crunch time, come from behind situations. So Eagles slower pace. I think the Titans will play pretty slow just because they're going to run the ball so much. Any team that is built around the run pretty much naturally is going to play at a slower pace. So those are
Yeah,
teams to keep in
Titans.
mind.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Titans.
exactly. But again, pace is something that I think it matters. It almost matters a little more in season long sometimes because those extra few plays can add up over a season. But in a given game, unless it's two teams with obviously fast paces or slow paces, I don't think it's going to make too much difference in one game because there's just so many things that you're not going to be able to predict. And to sit here and say, well, this team, averages 3 more plays than the average, and so that's an edge. Like
Right.
I don't know if I'd be looking at that. I'd just be looking at the individual matchups more. But in season long, I think you want to pay more attention to things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, a lot of teams maybe want to be ball control and want to play slow and want to control time of possession, but not everybody can do it, right? Like, Dallas was awesome at it, but that doesn't mean you can do it. Like, I'm sure Tennessee wants to play slow, but when they're getting smacked 21-3 in the first quarter, like, that's all out the window. And, Cleveland, I'm sure, wants to rely on their run game and all that with Hugh Jackson, but they might not be very good, and they might be really bad on defense, which is going to be a huge problem if they want to do that. So yeah, like teams theoretically that want to do this doesn't always play out in the games.
Definitely. And Jeremy G mentions that the Giants are going no huddle in camp. I think they're a candidate to speed things up a little bit. And I think something you have to look for when, if you are looking for those teams that are going to increase the pace, besides like an obvious coaching change like Chip Kelly, the Giants are a good candidate because they have a lot of continuity in terms of Ben McAdoo's been the OC for 2 years. Now he's the head coach. Eli Manning has been there. Odell Beckham has been there. Now Vereen's been in the system for a year. Jennings has been in the system for 2 years. So, the Giants have a lot of the pieces to where, because it's not going fast pace, it's about the players and their mental ability to be able to run play after play after play, and their physical ability to do so as well. So teams that have continuity on offense are always, when they already have their regular base offense down pat, and now they can throw in some wrinkles. So I could see a team like the Cardinals speeding it up because they're returning pretty much everybody from their offense, and teams like that, they're gonna probably with continuity, those are teams to look for in terms of pace. Indy going 3 wide as a base offense probably equals more no huddle to keep the D from making adjustments. I think that's a fair assessment. Got to see, because Luck missed so much time last year, again, that might take some time to develop. That's a team I could see doing that more as the season progresses. Remember, Dorsett, it's going to be his first time starting essentially with Luck because Luck missed the second half of the season. So Moncrief is still young. So I think Indianapolis is a team that could start going no huddle more. I'm not sure if Frank Gore is the right type of back for that type of offense, but we'll see about that. Adam, thoughts on Allen Robinson for week 1 and in general for the year?
Dude, Allen Robinson is the sickest, man. Like, I went to Penn State. I was at Penn State from 2000 to 2004, which was the worst 4-year stretch in Penn State football history, so I kind of have a bad taste in my mouth about Penn State football in general, but Allen Robinson is something to be proud of. Just total freak. I know there's going to be regression on his touchdowns. I get all that. He's not going to regress to like 6. Like, he's going to score double-digit touchdowns. I love Allen Robinson. I love that he plays in the softest division in football. They play the Packers in week 1 at home. I expect Jacksonville to play well in that game. I have no problem using him whatsoever, and I think he'll probably be a little bit less owned than some of those other guys. Probably AJ Green's playing the Jets, so maybe not, but I think Keenan Allen might be popular. Dez, Nuke. I don't know. That's an interesting tier there. What do you like in that tier week 1 where it's Alshon is 79, Keenan is 8K, Allen Robinson's 83, AJ is 84, but facing the Jets. But for the record, I don't think Revis is Revis anymore, but that's a point for another day. And then Dez is 85. What do you like there in that kind of second tier behind the top 4?
I would have to go with Brandon Marshall at 78.
Okay. I have no problem with that.
I think because I think even when you just read the names, I don't even think you mentioned Brandon, and then that's exactly what I'm looking for. I think in tournaments anyway. I think Brandon Marshall, Jets Cincinnati doesn't really sound like a sexy game for DFS. It's just kind of there, and I think because all of the other guys, Alshon, Keenan, Allen, AJ Green probably underowned too. Darrelle Revis is not, what he once was. And I think AJ will get a ton of targets. So actually, I like all of those guys, but I would probably go Brandon Marshall just because I think he'll be one of the lower owned out of that crew. But as far as Allen Robinson, yeah, like when you look for these stud receivers, you really look for their ability to be consistent because we all know they have huge upside. So you look for their ability to be consistent every week. Now, a guy like Antonio Brown or Odell Beckham can be consistent because they just run the most amazing routes, and they can beat any corner in any type of coverage with any route. Allen Robinson, he is able to be consistent because you can just throw the ball up to him even when he's covered, and he can come down with it. And not only can you do that, but you can do that to him deep, and that makes him not only consistent, but he has consistent huge upside on any given week because he's going to be a top red zone target. He's going to be I think he led the league in deep targets last year, so great receiver all year round. Wouldn't hesitate to use him in almost any matchup. Uh,
Why don't you give me your Sammy Coates take while we wait for more questions here?
oh man, so I really like Sammy Coates in the offseason. I was drafting him in a ton of MFL 10s, like wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6 when he was going in the 12th, 13th round. After seeing him in 2 preseason games, I am worried about my shares of Sammy Coates because he had 2 straight rough games. In the first preseason game, he had 2 fumbles, I believe. Just didn't have a good game. And then in the preseason game yesterday against the Lions, he got Landry Jones pick 6. And what do I mean by that? Coates was running a short route. I think it was a turnaround, little curl or something like that, where he had to turn and catch the ball, and he just completely got thrown off the route and lost position, and the defender was able to easily undercut him and take the interception back to the house. And Coates actually caused another interception later on in the game where he just didn't get separation in the end zone, and the pass was picked off. So those are 2 plays that stood out. There were a few other plays where Coates really just wasn't getting separation on his routes, and I think that's concerning. We know Coates has a straight line speed to replace Martavis Bryant as that sideline deep threat kind of player, but Coates doesn't seem to have the polish as far as the route running. And we know how things go with these veteran quarterbacks. If they don't trust you, it's going to be really hard for you to get on the field. I thought Eli Rogers looked good out of the slot. Marcus Wheaton can play outside in base 2 wide receiver sets, and he can play outside if they go 3 wide and choose to go with Rogers in the slot. So I think I'm going to calm down on my drafting of Sammy Coates in the middle rounds, especially now that his ADP has soared. It's in the 10th. I see him going in the 9th round of best ball drafts sometimes, and I think now's the time to probably back off a little. I think even Darius Hayward-Bay could be involved.
Oh,
I mean, it sucks to say, but I think it's really a thing. Somebody actually just typed that in the chat. DHG is going to be a thing. If you listen, I don't think he'll catch 50 balls for 800 yards, but I could see him getting 3, 4, 5 targets a game sometimes if Coates continues to struggle. And he's looked really bad to the point where if the season started next week, based on his 2 preseason games, I do not think Coates would open the season in 3 wide sets.
no, I agree with you, and we kind of go down this path a lot with size, speed, freak wide receivers. Guys like Cordero Patterson come to mind. Justin Hunter comes to mind. Dorial Green-Beckham comes to mind. Jeff Janis even comes to mind. Guys that we love but don't produce or don't even get on the field for whatever reason. And I think we could be getting into that territory with Sammy Coates. So, yeah, but I mean, Pittsburgh's in a world of trouble. Le'Veon Bell suspended, Martavis Bryant suspended, Ladarius Green possibly out for the year, Heath Miller retired. You know, Antonio Brown might need to see an increase of targets, which is insane to think about because he was getting like 13 or 14 a game last year. He might actually need to see an increase in targets, and I think DGB is just a pure special teamer. Like, DGB, not DGB, DHB.
It's like, oh, wow, what a hot take.
DHB, I think, is like the stone worst, and I would never roster him. I don't care whatsoever. So yeah, I think that Antonio Brown gets a bump, and I think that Wheaton, even though I hate him too, I don't see how he doesn't get 7 or 8 targets a game.
Yeah, that's all I was just about to ask you about Wheaton, because I agree. I think I'm not a huge fan of him from a talent perspective, but the thing about Wheaton is he's been playing with Big Ben these last 2 years. They've built up some level of trust and chemistry. You know, Wheaton's played on the outside a bit, I think in 2014 before Martavis got back, and 2015, and then played in the slot. So we know Wheaton can move around. We know he can put up big games when need be. And actually the last six games of the season plus the playoffs last year posted pretty decent numbers. I believe he posted wide receiver 3 numbers down the stretch. So, you know, I think if I was going to aggressively draft a Pittsburgh receiver, it would probably have to be Wheaton. He still lasts until the double-digit rounds at times in drafts, and I'd be fine with taking him in the 9th or something like that, just on the possibility. You know, if Antonio Brown were to go down, Wheaton would be Ben Roethlisberger's #1 target. So
yeah, trouble for Ben.
Yeah. That's the guy who I think his stock is taking a hit because of all of this. We know what Antonio Brown's going to give you, but at the end of the day, if they have no receivers he can trust, we know Ben has a tendency to hold the ball. I know they don't want him to get him hit like that. I think they'll lean on the running game. We know now a lot of the talk has been about, Le'Veon Bell plays like 95% of the snaps when he's healthy, but, given everything that's happened and how successful D'Angelo was, I could see them, maybe just leaning on the running game more and, maybe not even cutting down Le'Veon's touches once he returns, but just involving D. Will more. Le'Veon Bell absolutely could catch a ton of passes if Ladarius Green is out for the season. I think Le'Veon Bell could kind of lead all running backs in receptions. I don't think that's out of the question. So
Yeah, they're gonna have to get creative. Maybe the answer is like D'Angelo Williams in the backfield and Le'Veon Bell, split or something like that on certain plays. I mean, they're gonna have to do something creative.
definitely, and Le'Veon's a great route runner, so they could definitely do that. Is Ezekiel Elliott going to be the stud everyone thinks he will be this year? I think so. I don't see how he's not going to be. I mean, first of all, I don't necessarily buy the narrative that Ezekiel Elliott is the cure to the Cowboys defense. I don't buy that narrative at all. I think the Dallas defense is going to be bad. But there are certain teams that are the exception to the rule where they're going to run no matter what. And I think when you have a quarterback like Tony Romo, when you have a good offense, as long as Tony Romo is the quarterback of that offense, I think that offense is a good offense. As long as Dez Bryant is healthy, that's a good offense. And you're going to take a good offense that wants to run the ball with the top offensive line in the league and a very talented running back who they want to feed the ball. I mean, I don't see how he's not going to be a stud this year. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, so we already mentioned the best offensive line in the league, and or at least one of them, and probably the most run committed team in the league as well. And you don't use the number 4 overall pick on a on a guy to have him play behind Alf Morris or Darren McFadden or whatever else people are talking about. So yeah, I think Zeke is a fine pick in the back end of the first round, early second round in season long.
Definitely. 2 minutes. What else do we want to talk about? Anything we missed? Do we get on LeGarrette? Do we talk about LeGarrette Blount at all? I don't
No,
think
go ahead.
LeGarrette Blount. So I mean, season long, I think his ADP is too low. I mean, he's technically still fighting for a roster spot with Tyler Gaffney and some of these other
Nah,
guys.
that's
But
that's
yeah,
that's bull.
right. I mean, I think to the Patriots, I think he actually is because if you know, like he's getting so much work that I think they are auditioning him. I just think he's winning it by far. Like I think
Maybe.
he's gonna be like the week one start. He's gonna have the same rollback. But I think he's looked good in the preseason. I think he'll be the goal line back. Anytime you have a goal line back on the Patriots, that's 10 touchdown upside.
Mhm.
So that's a guy, so on a site like FanDuel, I'm not sure what his week one price is and probably don't want to use him as an underdog against the Cardinals, but I think the Patriots are favorites in their next 3 games after that, and there's going to be no Tom Brady. I think LeGarrette Blount would be a great play, especially on FanDuel where those touchdowns are just so important. Multiple touchdowns will set you apart in a GPP very quickly, and Blunt has a multi-touchdown upside anytime the Patriots take the field.
Mhm. Yeah, so kind of these 2 down pounders typically don't interest me for game flow considerations, like when Doug Martin's team gets behind, or when Todd Gurley's team gets behind, or when Adrian Peterson's team gets behind, or when Thomas Rawls' team gets behind. You're just screwed, So I rarely find myself rostering them, but there are situations where I would be likely to roster them if I'm really sure that it's a good spot for the team, and not just with the line, but also just I feel really good about the spot for the team. So yeah, I think LeGarrette Blount will be in play, specifically on FanDuel, as you mentioned, at times this year.
Yeah, and definitely never in cash games. Like I agree with you on like I would never play LeGarrette Blount in a cash game, no matter what kind of matchup he had, just because in cash games you always want players, as you mentioned, Adam, that can catch passes, because if the game flow goes in a direction that you don't expect, they will make up their lost production on the ground through the air, sometimes even more so because receptions are worth a little more and they go for a few more yards per pop than a carry. So that looks like it's about it for us. Hope you guys enjoyed the last hour talking with me and Adam Levitan. We will be back every Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, to answer all of your NFL, fantasy football, and DFS questions. So check us out here every Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern on Slurve, and check out all of the rest of the expert chats on Slurve for whatever sport you're looking for.